So what is work? In a previous video, we talked about what it may not be or what it's not, or the problem with it, or questions around it. And I ask you to write down what is work, or what you think about work, and what it is for you in your life. But how many of you came up with the idea that work is good? I mean, it's really good, all right? So if you think about it at a foundational level, I like to think of a child. I like to think of a child that is learning to clean their room, learning to take out the trash. Maybe they're putting the toys away. Maybe they're cleaning the dog, taking the dog on a walk. All of these things are work. Maybe then they start contributing to cooking and helping to prepare for meals or what have you, vacuuming the house. They're contributing to the family. They're contributing to what's happening around them. They're cleaning. They're learning skills. They're learning to do things. They're learning to take care of themselves. They're learning to help others. I don't know that any of these things in and of themselves, maybe there's a couple of those that would say I'm really passionate about cooking or I'm passionate about keeping a clean area. But for a lot of us, these are just things that we learn to do and skills that we develop that are really helpful in life. They're helpful for ourselves and they're helpful for others. They may not be what we are built to do. They may not be the highest form of the talents and the gifting that we have. But I think if you think throughout the world right now, anybody, anywhere, and if you think throughout history, work is good because work helps build character. It develops perseverance. It builds skills. It helps us maintain things. It helps us clean things. It helps us build things. Work is good. And what if we approach work that it is good versus thinking it's bad and it's only good if it does this, or it's only good if I'm really feeling it. It's only good if I'm really loving it on that day. And I believe that this is the foundational first step and the first level, kind of a foundational level of how we think about work. And if we can approach it that way, then even if I'm digging a ditch in the backyard, hopefully for some kind of a purpose, but if I'm digging the ditch, it's good. I'm active, I'm doing something. Maybe I'm helping myself or helping others, or I'm improving the area around me. And even in that, even though I personally was not born to dig ditches, I've done it. And I look back on that, I'm glad that I do it and I'm willing to do it. But it in and of itself is good. And I think that's where we need to start. And if we can start there, then I think we can take work to a lot of different places that'll help us on the path and the levels ahead. But let's begin there with work being good. So how does that reflect back on the word that you put down or how you thought about work previously? Because I think for the world around us, that may be actually a revolutionary thought, that work is actually good in and of itself. The next thing that comes along, we'll start here at level 1, and this is good. The next level is work is for what we call provision. So think about a child that maybe they're getting towards 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and they start working for money for the first time. And they start having jobs around the house, maybe for family or maybe for the neighborhood. So work is good. But then work is also next, and in order. We talked about the importance of order. The next thing to think about is that work is also for provision. And so just even pulling the good word into provision, it's good if I'm able to provide for myself, if I'm able to provide for others, if I'm building the skills of how to handle money, which will be a lifelong process for all of us. But there's a lot of value that comes from understanding that this is here to provide for myself and to provide for others around me. Okay, so that's the second level. The third level is that work is giving me a toolbox. So I remember when I was cutting a yard, and it was no longer just my mom and my dad that I was cutting the yard for, or maybe even my grandparents, but it was someone else. And maybe someone else had an opinion about how well I did at cutting the yard. and the level of which I was or wasn't doing it, right? Or the timing of when they wanted it done. That was such a value for me in building a skill set in terms of just delivering value for somebody else. And yes, I was learning to cut the yard as well, and that was a skill set that I could then use and did use throughout my teenage years and later into life, and that was helpful. So work develops this toolbox in practical skills, but also in kind of what we call the EQ, how we relate to other people, how we relate to ourselves, what our motivation is, how do we handle difficult situations. All the things that we're going to need in life to some degree or another can be developed in this wonderful toolbox that gets bigger and more refined over time as we think about work developing the skills that we have. So that's kind of the third level. I want you to think about what are some of the skills that you, as you kind of reflect back recently, or maybe depending on your age, the last 5 or 10 years, maybe longer, that you've been developing through the work and the jobs that you have done. Think about that. Maybe write a couple of them down. So that's kind of the third level. The fourth level, I think, starts to relate now sequence-wise, order-wise, into if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life. I don't think we still are at that level of fully saying that is what work should be. But the fourth level, right after skills, we've got our interests and our passions. So after skills, what you've probably, as you reflect on your life, thought about is where did you see that your interests and your passions were discovered? Like when you started having certain jobs, and we kind of think about, that job that you had, you unpack it, there were certain aspects of that job that you really resonated with, and maybe some that you didn't as much. And maybe if you look back on each job that you had in your life, depending upon, how much of a work history you have, how much experience you have, you probably can look at different ones and see how it's, how you learned something there, but also how it spoke into kind of who you are and how you're built and how your interests and your passions, things that you love to do, things that you're more excited about, things that more connect to who you are, were coming out in that role. I remember I was selling appliances, but I worked for a company that we didn't get commissions, and I loved that because I could just go and figure out what I thought was the best. I saw what was getting returned into the store and what wasn't. Definitely learned more from a standpoint of about the different appliances that we had. But I loved then giving my recommendations in an objective way to the people that were coming in and looking for whatever refrigerator or whatever vacuum. I remember getting real passionate about a couple of vacuum cleaners that we had that I knew did well. And so, but you might have had that same experience where you had jobs and part of who you were started to come out and connect. It may have been that you loved, maybe you were a server in a restaurant and you loved creating that great experience for that client, or maybe you're in the back of the house and you loved kind of preparing the meal. So I think if we look back, we can see the interest and the passions started coming out through the work that we were doing. And I love that because it's like, once we get the ship out of the harbor, we can start to direct it, right? And I think that's part of how all this starts to fit together in a process. So we got level 4 here, and underneath it, this is actually a sequence over time, and then this is maybe the value of how it connects to us. So that over time, there's increasing value. Value for what? Actually, you get to decide that. Like, what is valuable to you about work? It may be the provision. It may be the expression of your talents and your gifting. It may be the impact that it has on people that are around you locally or people in the world at large. But it's one of those things that your abilities and your value are going to grow over time, and you're also going to be able to steer your direction towards your direction and purpose. So your purpose is going to come out more over time. But again, it's a purpose that's within you, not a purpose that you're necessarily expecting to fully get from the work that you're doing. As you look at this for yourself, there's something really important to remember. A couple things. One, this is a process because this is over time, right? I think what we would all love to do is fast forward steps in processes in our lives. And we probably want to do the same here. So we probably want to look at interests and passions and go, all right, I understand it's good. All right, I understand it's for provision. I want the skills. Those sound great. Toolbox. Can I just go to Home Depot, grab the toolbox, and then hop over here and really start to apply them? And I think that is probably a common desire and maybe a common mistake, to want to accelerate the process before we're ready or not trust the process that we're in. Sometimes taking the skills, for instance, you may be, I'm thinking back on my own life and career. I mean, the first jobs that I had, I was learning software programs. I was learning data entry. I was learning where things went for clients. I was learning back in our day, I had investment pages that were coming that I'd put into the investment book that was our reference guide, and I was listening hearing conversations on investments and on finance, from the experts that were around me, and trying to take that in. And then doing the same thing in the next job, and then being able to maybe start to deliver some of that, but learning more along the way. Maybe getting credentialed, maybe learning more, getting more educated, having more environments where I'm supporting others in the work that they're doing, and me learning through the process of helping them do certain types of work. So there's time that is important. And I think if we don't respect the time, then we can feel like we're missing out, we're not where we should be. It's that whole thing that we hear about Instagram or social media, that we're looking at other people's highlight reels versus the reality of our day-to-day, right? And that's just not a fair comparison. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the path that you're on. And let's remember something that we said previously, is that your path is unique, and your path is going to be unique to you. In the meantime, be confident where you are. Think about the toolbox that you've been developing. Think also about the tools that you've yet to develop that are in front of you. And maybe hey, the next 2 or 3 or 4 steps I need to learn in my current role are, what would those be? Maybe take a second right now to think about the next 1 or 2 most important things that you could learn in your current role as it lines up with the role that you want next. So it may be 2 or 3 things that you need to learn now for your current role to be better, or it may be 2 or 3 things you need to learn in order to be prepared for the role that's ahead of you. Take a couple of seconds and write that down. So as we wrap this section up, reflect on these questions. Where have you seen, or what have you seen work provide for you that's good in your life? What areas can you look back and go, yeah, work was good because of what? What would you say about that? Then on provision, what has work provided for you? What have you learned from having to handle and manage the money that comes from work and spending it and saving it? What's that look like in your life? Is there anything that you could write down that's been something significant or meaningful in the last year or two? If you think about the skills, what are the skills? What are some of the key skills, maybe even in the last 12 to 24 months, that you've developed through the work that you've been doing? Or maybe it was over time, over the last 5 or 10 years, or maybe some of the different jobs that you had that you go, wow, when I was at this job in college, this is what I learned there that's been really helpful for me. For me, I working as a server, working at Chick-fil-A, the ability to create a great experience for somebody is what I discovered, something that I loved. And I think so many points of what we can see in our work history can speak into who we are, what we enjoy, and really what our future could be. So reflect on those things for yourself. And then finally, what are some of the interests and passions? So make sure that you take a little bit of inventory there. What are a couple of inventory questions that you'd ask yourself in terms of, where have I seen passions emerge in the work that I've done? What has really connected to me in terms of meaning, value, things that I've gotten excited about, in different aspects of the work that you're doing now and the work that you've done, throughout your work life, throughout some of the different jobs that you've had in your career. So take a couple of minutes as we close, capture those, because this is a part of your story, and it's a part of your path, and what you've done and who you are up to this point is going to speak into who you're going to be in the future.